assemble this unruly crowd, and
Are we ready to roll?
I don't see why not. I'm sure I forgot something. What are you doing?
It says unmute.
No,
Don't touch it. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything.
You know what? I'm.
Okay. Welcome to our service. From the Unitarian Society of Northampton and Florence. I'm Judy Hyde, and I'm a member of the board, the choir, and the Climate Action Group. It's wonderful to see you here this morning in the Great Hall and online. Thank you to everyone who is helping make this service happen this morning. If you are new or returning after a time away, we're very glad you're here. Feel free to fill out the blue welcome card, and you can put it in the offering plate in the service. There's also an online version that you'll find through the link in the chat. We'll put you on our email list so you can receive information about all our activities. We strive to be a congregation that welcomes people of all ages, races, religious beliefs, backgrounds, sexual orientations, gender identities, and abilities. We belong to the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, and we are guided by and inspired by its values and principles. Our values and principles move us to remember that we in Northampton inhabit unceded land of the Pecumtuck and Nipmuc peoples. They remind us to acknowledge our responsibility to face the legacies of dispossession and systemic racism that are part of our collective history, even as we also affirm and celebrate the legacies that inspire us. After the service, everyone is invited to take part in the collaborative art project in the social room about the Article 2 proposal. We will explore proposed revisions to the UU principles and sources with a collage project, and no artistic ability is needed. You can also take part in community cooking in the kitchen for a Cathedral in the Night meal donation from 11:15 to 12:30. Cooks and helpers will enjoy a light lunch together. One more announcement, we will hold a memorial service for Cynthia Barker here in the Great Hall on Saturday, April 15th at 2 p.m. If you'd like to help with the reception afterward, get in touch with John Sass. We're here to celebrate, to reflect, and to support one another in sustaining hope and upholding our values. If you are on Zoom, we ask that you please keep your videos off during the greeting, and if you're in the Great Hall, thank you for wearing a mask. And now we will begin our service.
The miracle of Exodus is not whether or not the Red Sea parted. The miracle is that a group of people finally realized for themselves, for us, and for all time that you cannot stay in Mitzrayim, in the narrow confines of Egypt. Our personal commitments must be towards growth and change. Our religious commitments must be towards goals beyond our own personal welfare. Anything less is a commitment toward enslavement, our own and that of all humankind.
Please rise in body or spirit for the lighting of our chalice, and we'll remain standing at the end for the hymn. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the heart's secret places. Blessed are the stories that keep the flame alive. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame.
Good morning. This Wednesday, as many of you probably know, is the first night of Passover. Passover is a Jewish holiday that lasts for 8 days and starts with 2 nights of special meals called Seders. Seder means order, and there's very important special rituals that happen in a particular order during the Seder, one of which is the telling of the Passover story, which we'll do now. Long ago, the Jewish people came to Egypt and lived there in peace. However, over time, new kings called pharaohs came to power. They enslaved the Jews and made them work very hard. But the Jewish people survived and grew. Pharaoh got worried and said, "There are too many of these Jews. I'm scared they'll rise up and take over." So Pharaoh tried to get the Jewish mothers to stop having sons. One mother put her son in a basket and hid him in the weeds of a river to protect him, while her daughter kept watch. There he is. Pharaoh's daughter found the baby and fell in love with him instantly. She convinced her father to let her raise him. The baby was named Moses, as many of you probably know, and Moses grew up in Pharaoh's house, raised like royalty, never knowing that he was actually Jewish. But Moses didn't think it was fair that the Jews were slaves. One day, he got so angry about the injustice that he got into a fight. Pharaoh was furious, and Moses ran away. He ran to the desert, and he became a shepherd there. While he was in the desert, he got a message through a burning bush that he was in fact Jewish and that he should go back and help lead the Jews to freedom. This was a long time ago, before phones and apps and social media, so that was the best way for God to communicate with Moses. Moses did go back to lead the Jews, only to discover that they had already started to organize themselves and they were working on a plan to escape. They were glad to have a leader, especially one who knew Pharaoh and could get into the palace to talk to him. They decided that Moses should be the one to demand freedom from Pharaoh. And you probably aren't surprised that Pharaoh said no. Moses warned Pharaoh that bad things called plagues would happen if he did not let the Jews out of slavery. The first plague that happened was that the water that people used for drinking, for bathing, for cooking, turned to blood. And after each plague that happened, the Jews said, "Let my people go." Will you help me with that? Can you all say, "Let my people go"? Let my people go. Thank you. And of course, Pharaoh said no. So the next plague was frogs, and there were frogs everywhere. Everywhere you looked, everywhere you stepped, there were frogs. And the Jewish people said, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh said no. Next, the dust, and we're talking about Egypt, so there's a lot of dust. The dust turned to lice, and you can only imagine how itchy that might have been. And the Jewish people said, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh said no. Then there were flies everywhere, swarms of flies, flies that were so thick they blackened out the sun. And the Jewish people said, and Pharaoh said no. The next plague was the plague of livestock. And what that meant was that the livestock were sick. So, as you can see in the picture, they're all lying down ill. And the Jewish people said, and Pharaoh said no. So the next plague was boils. And for those of you who don't know, boils are itchy and painful on your skin. And the Jews said, and Pharaoh said no. So the next plague was hail, which some of you may have experienced last night. But this was huge hailstones and thunder and lightning. And the Jews said, and Pharaoh said no. And next, locusts came. And so this was another insect, but these ones ate all of the crops and decimated the food for the upcoming year. And the Jewish people said, Pharaoh was starting to worry about all these terrible things happening, but he said no. And then there was a plague of darkness, and for 3 days the sun did not return, and everything was dark. And the Jews said, so Pharaoh was getting pretty stressed out, but he said no. And finally, the last and I think worst plague came, and that was that the firstborn of the people who were not Jewish was killed, the death of the firstborn. And the Jewish people said, and Pharaoh realized he had to do something. This couldn't continue. And he said, okay, I'll let you go. And the Jews knew that they were going to have to act fast if they were actually going to get out of Egypt. So they quickly packed up all their things, and the bread didn't have time to rise. And that's where matzah comes from, the flat cracker that you eat on Passover. And you can see somebody in the picture who's taking their bread out of the oven, not risen so it's flat. So they're packing up, and they're leaving as fast as they can. And as they suspected, Pharaoh changed his mind as they were leaving. And he sent his armies to chase them down. But they reached the Red Sea with the Egyptian army right behind them. And they were trapped. The sea was in front of them. The army was behind them. And they gathered their courage and they stepped into the water. And a miracle happened. The Red Sea parted and opened so that they could pass through. And as soon as they made it through and the Egyptian army stepped into the water came back and fell on top of the Egyptian army. So they had escaped. They made it to the other side. They had worked together. They hadn't given up. And finally, they reached freedom together.
Now I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn 210, Wade in the Water. It's in the gray hymn. Greet your neighbor. First, turn around and say, oh my goodness. Say hello to the 40+ people who are online this morning. Hello, everyone online. And then say hello to your neighbor. Hi, everyone. Hey, Rick. Hey, Abby and Mark. Who else do I see? You know what I feel like? I feel like Miss, what was her name on Romper Room? Some of you are old enough to remember Romper Room. What was Miss Jean? Sometimes I feel like Miss Jean. Hi, Gail. Hi, John. Jane, great to see you. Robbie, good to see you. And Kirby and Claire. Who else is here? Sherry. Joyce, nice to see you. Molly, Bill, Larry. Sally Weiss. Sally Lawton, 2 Sallys. Wonderful to see you. Steve and Teresa. Harriet. Catherine. Katie Hicks. Susie on Zoom. And Ginny, I thought I saw you here, but obviously you're not. Hi, Georgia. Who else is there? Jan. Jan's out on a walk. Peggy, good to see you. Kate. Kazue, hi. Rich. Alice. It's good to see you, Alice. I'm glad you're here. Wendla. Allison, Melissa, Laura. Sarah, good to see you. Patty, Kamala, Nancy, Carol. Wow. Wonderful. You can hear the noise in the hall. There are lots of people here too. And now it's time for everyone who is going to religious education activities to depart, and we will sing you out. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. Go now in peace, go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you everywhere, everywhere you may go. One wonderful thing about stories is that they change, they morph, they transform themselves over the years. So Jessica's version was a slightly transformed version of the real thing. So I'm sharing a little bit this morning from the book of Exodus. And I'm calling this the prequel to the Passover itself. A little more about the story of the burning bush. Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush, saying, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry. Now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. And Moses said, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I'll be with you. Go, assemble the elders of Israel and say, the Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me. I declare that I will bring you up out of the misery of Egypt to a land flowing with milk and honey. And Moses said, look, they may not believe me or listen to me. So God gives Moses a magical staff that when he throws it turns into a snake, and when he picks it up again, it turns back into a staff. And he should be able to convince the people with that, right? But Moses says, "Oh, Lord, I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue." Then the Lord said to him, "Who gives speech to mortals? Who makes them mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Now go, I will be your mouth and teach you what you are to speak." But Moses said, "Oh, Lord, please send someone else." And then the Lord got angry. And he said, "I will teach you what to do. Your brother Aaron will serve as a mouth for you, and you will serve as God for him." So Moses went. Our generosity makes everything we do possible, and it helps us support organizations and causes and movements in the greater community, as well as to do all the work within our walls. Half of the proceeds of each week's offering support the society's operating budget, and half are shared outside our walls. And on the screen, you can see the names of the organizations that we're supporting between now and the end of June. You can mail in a check, you can donate online, you can put your contribution in one of the plates that the ushers will pass. And our offering will now be given and very, very gratefully received. So this is actually from a prayer for beginning a Seder meal. And after I read it, we'll sing hymn number 1044. That's in the teal hymnal, the paperback. The words to that hymn come from a poem by Hannah Senesh, who was a Hungarian Jew who was among a group of people parachuted into Yugoslavia by the British during World War II on a mission to rescue Jews who were about to be sent to concentration camps. Zenes was captured, she was imprisoned, and she was tortured. And during that ordeal, she refused to reveal any information. And she was executed by a firing squad. She's honored as a poet and as a hero all over the world, but especially in Israel. We begin by honoring the light. for our families, our beloveds, our friends, for all our relations, for those who are near and for those from whom we feel an unwanted distance, for the newborn, for the elderly, for all the wounded children. May the light of our candles inspire us to use our powers to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse. May their radiance pour out upon our hearts and spread light into the darkened corners of our world. Let's take some moments together in silence. So the people of Israel came across the Sea of Reeds, or the Red Sea. They came to the wilderness and they complained against Moses and Aaron. They said, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. And Moses and Aaron said, in the evening you shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaining. Moses spoke to the Lord, and the Lord spoke to Moses, and in the evening quails came up and covered the camp. So there was meat. And in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. And when that layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. And that was the manna from heaven. It was like bread. And that was the food that the people in the story ate for 40 years in the wilderness. Later, there's a similar incident, no water. Again, the people complain and say, why didn't we were better off in Egypt? And again, a miracle happened. They wander some more, and Moses is finally called to go up the mountain where he receives the tablets of the law, beginning with the 10 Commandments. And while he's there, the people lose faith. And this is the way the book of Exodus describes it. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, and they said, come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him. And Aaron answered them, take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me. So the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron, and he took what they handed him and made it into an idol, cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. And then he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord, which was the calf. So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings, and afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. I have to get the updated version. Every time I read these stories, I see new things. The story in the book of Exodus begins with a genealogy and then with the birth of Moses. And it is one of the oldest stories known. It's well over 2,500 years old and refers to a time at least 3,000 years ago, if in fact anything like the Exodus from Egypt actually took place. And that doesn't really matter whether it did or not. The story comes from a nomadic, tribal, patriarchal culture that held many values that are foreign and appalling to many of us today. And it's also a story that's full of characters that really could come out of Disney. Moses, Aaron, Pharaoh, the God, the Israelite people. There is Disney-esque and superhero magic with the burning bush and the magic staff and snakes and plagues and the God who appears in a pillar of fire, the parting of a sea with the wall of water on either side to let the people cross on dry ground. And the book of Exodus is important because it's a continuation of the origin story of the Jewish people with the giving of the Ten Commandments and other laws. And it contains the liturgical traditions and other practices that are still followed today, like eating unleavened bread during Passover week. And in the Black church tradition, as well as in Judaism, the Passover story resonates as a story of release from enslavement and oppression. The two hymns that we're singing this morning from the Gray Hymnal are from the spiritual tradition. Wade in the Water, obviously celebrates the escape to freedom through the sea. And I didn't know this, like Follow the Drinking Gourd, it is a map song that was used to warn fugitives from enslavement to wade in the water. Go into the water and you'll eliminate the scent that trackers used to find escaped people. When Israel was in Egypt land, which we'll sing after the sermon, is also a spiritual. And you might notice in the bottom on the right, they give you the name of the tomb, and the tune is named Tubman, in honor of the Underground Railroad heroine and abolitionist Harriet Tubman. So Passover is a celebration of resistance to power and oppression, and real life and the actual story are much more complicated. The people stand on the shore of the Sea of Reeds, free at last, and then the story goes on with resistance, struggles, hunger, thirst, progress, moments of betrayal, moments of lost faith, and punishment for that lost faith. So the Exodus story is important, and it's full of insights into the nature of faith, of power and oppression, of fear, human insecurity, and human foibles. Consider Pharaoh. Now, the way Jessica told the story, he just says no. But actually, that's not what happens. What happens is, the plague happens, he says, okay, I'll let you go. And then once the plague has ended, he reneges on his promise. And that happens over and over and over and over through every plague. So Pharaoh is he's a person who worships his own power and will protect it at any cost. And he lies and bargains in bad faith. Plague after plague, he agrees to release the Israelite people in order to get Moses to end the current pestilence, and then he immediately goes back on his word. If I got to cast a new version of a Moses movie, who would you give the part to? Somebody who was indicted recently would be a good candidate. Or the, whatever he is, the Tsar of Russia, the current Tsar of Russia, he'd be a good candidate too, to play Pharaoh. But I think I can probably find a little bit of Pharaoh in myself. Have you ever made a bargain and changed your mind? Or used your power in a way that was unkind? Maybe not deliberately, but out of ignorance or indifference? I thought back, and I do remember a situation many years ago, 40 years ago. I was supervising, once upon a time in my life, I was an auditor, and I was supervising a group on a job away from home on the South Shore of New Jersey. And in this case, we were at the end of a long, intense job, and we celebrated by going out with the client for supper at a bar. And one of my staff didn't want to come. She sat there looking miserable, and when the dancing started, she asked if she could leave. The rest of us were having fun. We had come in one car, and only one of us was sober. And the hotel was 20 minutes away, and it didn't occur to me to see if we could get her a cab. I just treated it like an unreasonable request, and I know she was miserable. She wasn't a dancer. She wasn't a person comfortable in social situations, and I made it worse for her. And I wonder if she remembers. Moses was Pharaoh's opposite. Moses is a leader who reluctantly grows into his authority and power. Poor Moses, he's minding his own business, tending his father-in-law's sheep, when suddenly this burning bush appears and starts issuing commands. He doesn't want to be God's mouthpiece. He doesn't want to be the leader of the Israelite people. He protests for 3 paragraphs. Why me? Who are you anyway? He asks. Who are you? What's your name? Who do I even tell them you are? And then they won't listen to me. I'm no public speaker. Please send someone else. Have you ever resisted an opportunity at first that turned out to be right for you? Or successfully resisted doing something you later wished you had done? This is a silly story, but I resisted saying yes the first time my now husband Booker asked me to go out for a drink. I didn't know him very well, and I did not like, he knows this, I did not like the group of young men that he spent a lot of his time with. But a few of my friends convinced me he wasn't that bad. Now, that was nearly 50 years ago. That's like 6 months short of 50 years ago. So we heard this at the beginning of the service. John Nichols wrote, "The Passover miracle is that a group of people finally realized for themselves, for us, and for all time, that you cannot stay in Mitzrayim, in the narrow confines of Egypt." Some of you probably remember John Nichols. He served this congregation as an interim minister in the 2001 to 2002 year. And for many years before that, John was the minister of my home church in the Boston area. And his sermons played a big part in Booker's and my decision to become Unitarian Universalists. We all have narrow places. We all have our own Mitzrayim, places we have resisted or are stuck in or are resisting moving past, like a hated job or an unhealthy and unsafe relationship, or a relationship that's simply damaged beyond repair, not good for us anymore. Or a Mitzrayim could be living in a body that doesn't fit the person, doesn't look like the person you know yourself to be. Or a struggle with mental illness or addiction, your own, that of somebody you love. Both of our sons had various struggles in their teens and 20s, and some of them we resisted seeing, and some we saw and felt helpless about. And that is a painful place to be in, to see our children or others we love in their own Mitzrayim, making one for us as well, and not be of much use. to just have to watch and worry and wait. It's no good for any of us when we stay in the narrow confines of our own Egypts, the places where we're stuck, the places where we're afraid, the places where we're no longer growing, no longer fully alive. And most of the time, we cannot get out of those places all by ourselves. Moses' life as a shepherd is a stuck place. And his resistance to change is understandable. He's afraid. He's afraid of going back to Egypt. He's afraid of being misunderstood. He's afraid of being inadequate. And he's right to resist, knowing that he's, as he said, slow of speech and slow of tongue. And finally, this bush listens and says, okay, there's your brother Aaron coming along. He is well-spoken. He will be at your side. He will serve as your spokesperson. And that enables Moses to step forward. John says our personal commitments must be towards growth and change. And we need support to help us keep those commitments. We need loving helpers. We need community. He also wrote, our religious commitments must be towards goals beyond our personal welfare. Which brings me back to the proposal to revise our UU Association's Statement of Values and Principles. It says, love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. And we are accountable to one another for doing the work of living those shared values. And then it lists 6 values, which are interdependence, pluralism, I'm trying to remember them, I'm trying to memorize them now. Interdependence, pluralism, justice, transformation, generosity, and equity. Transformation. It's an interesting choice. Personal spiritual transformation and the courage to deal with change. Several members of this congregation, and more are welcome to join, have been engaging with one another about the proposal. And Terry Harnacker just shared an insight that relates both to transformation and accountability, although she didn't mean it exactly that way. Well, maybe she did. Terry is a mathematician. You probably did. Terry is a mathematician. And she said, accountability equals action plus revision, always. Accountability equals action and revision, always. Transformation. Immediately after the service today, Jessica has put together an opportunity to join in making collages of images that remind you of the values that are proposed as part of the revision of the values and principles. You don't have to be, she said, you don't have to be an artist. You can cut and glue. Such a good thing, cutting and gluing. And you're also welcome to join in conversations about the proposal. The next formal one is on next Wednesday at 7 o'clock via Zoom. If you're interested in this, please talk to me and I can point you in various directions. Because we really want people to engage and think about this and reflect on it and discern together. So I hope many of you will join in, and I hope many of you will join us this morning. Our final hymn is number 104, When Israel Was in Egypt's Land. I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in singing. These are words from Paul Robeson, singer, actor, activist, Black American, who was, in his own word, dedicated to the worldwide cause of humanity for freedom, peace, and brotherhood. He said, "Sorrow will one day turn to joy. All that breaks the heart and oppresses the world will one day give place to peace and understanding, and everyone will be free." Go in peace.